Elsa, queen of hiding herself from the world. When you think about it, Frozen isn't really about ice powers. It's about what happens when someone spends years trying to hide parts of themselves because they're afraid of what people might think. It's about emotional suppression. It's about fear. It's about shame. It's about what happens when authenticity feels more dangerous than isolation, which is surprisingly relatable for a movie where a woman builds an ice castle in under 3 minutes while singing the most aggressively catchy song in Disney's history. Because, let's be honest, most of us don't have magical ice powers. And if you do, please tell me your story in the comments down below. But many of us have spent years hiding something. Maybe it's our emotions, maybe it's our struggles, maybe it's our personality, maybe it's our dreams. Maybe it's the weird, nerdy thing we love talking about, but don't because we're worried that people will judge us. I can relate. It's why I started this channel, which I mostly talk to myself on, but still. If you've ever felt like you had to become smaller, quieter, safer, or more acceptable just to belong, then Elsa's story might be one of the most psychologically accurate Disney stories ever told. Welcome back, fellow mages, to the Grounded Mage, where we explore how myth and magic exist in everyday life. Today, we're diving into Frozen, but not as a sing along and buy a snowman mug kind of experience. We are looking at the psychology underneath Elsa's journey: emotional suppression, fear, authenticity, shame, and the exhausting job of managing an image instead of a self. And yes, we're going to talk about Let It Go, the anthem accidentally adopted by every exhausted adult who's ever whispered, I can't do this anymore, while sitting in the grocery store parking lot. Let's just get into it. Let's start at the beginning, of course. The story begins with childhood joy. Elsa and Anna play together. Elsa's powers are magical and everything feels alive and connected. And then the accident happens. Anna gets hurt, the trolls intervene, and Elsa receives the message that shapes her entire identity: conceal, don't feel. That's not just advice, it becomes a survival strategy. Now, to be fair, her parents are trying to protect her. But psychologically, this advice is a disaster because Elsa doesn't learn how to regulate her emotions. She learns how to fear her emotions. There is a huge difference. This is classic emotional suppression, consciously trying to hide or inhibit emotional expression. Research by James Gross and colleagues shows that suppression may reduce outward expression, but it doesn't reduce the internal emotional experience. In fact, it often increases physiological stress and cognitive load. Translation: Elsa looks composed, but inside she is running emotional Windows 95 with 47 tabs open, and one of them is playing panic music. We see this throughout the entire movie. Elsa isolates herself, avoids Anna, wears gloves constantly, and tries to control every emotional reaction. Her life becomes less about living and more about not slipping up. I want to go back to James Gross for just a minute. Gross found that suppressing emotions doesn't actually eliminate them. Instead, suppression often increases physiological stress while making emotional experiences stronger internally. In other words, you can try to hide your emotions from other people, but your nervous system still knows that they're there. Sound familiar? Because that's exactly what's happening to Elsa. Every time she's afraid, her powers spike. Every time she's anxious, they become harder to control. Every time she feels a strong emotion, the thing she's trying to suppress gets stronger. The more she fights herself, the more herself fights back. And honestly, how many of us have done exactly that? Have you ever tried to just not feel something? How did that work out for you? Did the feeling disappear, or did it show up at a later date as anxiety, irritability, burnout, stress, or overthinking? Because emotions are kind of like Olaf. You can try to get rid of them, but they usually come back. Let's pause and connect this further to real life. When people spend years hiding parts of themselves, emotions, needs, identity, ambition, vulnerability, they often experience chronic anxiety, emotional numbness, exhaustion from constant self monitoring, difficulty with intimacy, and sudden emotional eruptions. Studies on emotional suppression consistently show associations with lower well being, reduced relationship satisfaction, and increased stress responses. And this doesn't only apply to dramatic secrets. Sometimes the hidden part is simply I'm struggling, I'm angry, I need help, I want something different, I'm tired of pretending that I'm okay. Elsa's ice powers are a fantasy. However, the psychological pattern is painfully ordinary. Okay, I'm going to get back to the story, but I really want to talk about Anna before we move on because we have to admit that Anna is very important to Elsa's self growth journey. You see, Anna's role is psychologically fascinating because she repeatedly moves toward Elsa instead of away from her. She doesn't deny the danger of Elsa's powers, but she also refuses to reduce Elsa to them. This mirrors an important principle from attachment theory. Secure relationships help regulate fear and other emotions. When someone experiences acceptance rather than rejection, the nervous system becomes more flexible and resilient. Elsa expects abandonment, but Anna keeps showing up. And that consistency matters more than perfect words do, because she represents something Elsa lacks: connection, openness, relationship, messy, imperfect humanity. Anna keeps trying to reconnect, even after being shut out for years, even after doors literally get slammed in her face repeatedly, which is impressive persistence and probably grounds for therapy. But Anna demonstrates something psychologists consistently find. Human connection is one of the strongest protective factors for mental health. People heal in relationships, not in isolation, not in ice castles, not in emotional lockdown, in relationships, even difficult ones, and especially in imperfect ones. Okay, back to Elsa's story. As she grows older, she develops a strategy. If I can just be perfect, then no one will know. No mistakes, no emotional reactions, no vulnerability, no authenticity, just control. Lots and lots of control. This mirrors what psychologists call maladaptive perfectionism. Now, perfectionism isn't always about being the best. Often, it's about avoiding rejection. If I never make mistakes, no one can criticize me. If I perform perfectly, I will be safe. If I control everything, nothing bad can happen. But perfectionism creates an impossible task because humans aren't machines. And eventually, the pressure becomes too much, which brings us to Coronation Day, which is the psychological equivalent of shaking a bottle of pop for 13 years and then opening it in public. This is where the gloves come off. Literally. Elsa's carefully controlled world collapses. Anna pushes her, the emotions rise, the fear explodes. And suddenly, everyone sees what she has spent her entire life hiding. And what's fascinating is that Elsa's worst fear immediately comes true. People are afraid of her, they judge her, they don't understand her. So, what does she do? She runs, which is exactly what most people do when vulnerability goes badly. Psychologists often describe this as avoidance coping. When something painful happens, we escape, we withdraw, we isolate, we avoid situations that trigger discomfort. The problem with that? Avoidance provides short term relief, but long term suffering. And that is exactly what Elsa experiences. Now, here's where things get interesting because most people see Let It Go as a song about empowerment. And it absolutely is. But psychologically, it's also something else. It's avoidance. Just stay with me here. The song feels triumphant because Elsa finally stops pretending. She takes off the gloves, she stops performing royal perfection, she expresses emotion openly. That's genuine authenticity, but she doesn't return to Arendelle. She doesn't learn how to connect. She doesn't process her fear. She doesn't repair her relationships. The scene is more complicated than be yourself and everything works out. Elsa is still isolated. She's still convinced herself that she's safer by herself. Her freedom is built on withdrawal from relationships. And this is important because authenticity is not the same thing as emotional exile. Healthy authenticity includes both self expression and connection. Humanistic psychologist Carl Rogers argued that psychological well being comes from congruence, the alignment between our real self and our pretend self. Elsa begins moving toward congruence in the mountains, but she hasn't yet learned how to be authentic with other people. She goes to a mountain and builds a giant ice fortress where nobody can bother her. That's not healing, that's isolation with a killer soundtrack. The castle is beautiful, but it's still a prison, just a prettier one. Sometimes what feels like freedom is actually avoidance dressed up as independence. Have you ever convinced yourself that you don't need people when you were really just protecting yourself from being hurt by them? Elsa's story connects to research done by Brené Brown, which has repeatedly shown that shame thrives in secrecy. Shame says, if people really knew me, then they wouldn't love me. Elsa lives inside that fear. She doesn't think her powers are something amazing. She thinks that there's something that's wrong with her. That's a huge distinction because when we identify with our struggles rather than experiencing them, they become part of our identity. Instead of saying, I have anxiety, we start saying, I'm anxious. Instead of, I made a mistake, we say, I am a mistake. Elsa doesn't believe she possesses something dangerous. She believes that she is dangerous. And that's why she isolates herself. Because shame always whispers the same lie: hide. At the end of the first film, Elsa learns that love, not suppression, is what helps her regulate her powers. This is not positive vibes solve trauma. The movie is more nuanced than that. What changes is Elsa's relationship to herself and to others. She stops seeing herself as irredeemably dangerous. She allows connection. She experiences acceptance instead of secrecy. In psychological terms, she moves from defensive self control toward integrated self regulation. Emotions are no longer enemies to imprison, they become experiences that she can recognize, express, and navigate. And that is a very different life. Here's the real lesson: hiding works at first. Suppressing emotions can get you through difficult moments. Masking parts of yourself can help you survive difficult environments. Control can provide temporary safety. But eventually, the bill comes due because the energy required to constantly hide is enormous. And over time, it creates exhaustion, anxiety, loneliness, and disconnection. The goal isn't to reveal everything to everyone. The goal is to stop living at war with yourself. There's a few questions I want you to sit with this week. What parts of yourself do you still treat like they need to be hidden? Are there emotions, needs, ambitions, or identities you manage tightly because you fear how others will respond? When did you first learn that certain feelings were too much? Like Elsa's conceal, don't feel, many of us absorb early rules about anger, sadness, vulnerability, or independence. What is emotional suppression costing you right now? Think about energy, relationships, anxiety, numbness, or the feeling of performing instead of living. And where do you need authenticity and connection at the same time? Because Elsa's Mountain Palace offered honesty without intimacy. Real healing requires both. Maybe Elsa's story resonates because so many of us know what it's like to hide, to minimize ourselves, to wear emotional gloves, to keep certain parts of ourselves locked away. But the cost of hiding is greater than the risk of being seen. Not by everyone, not all at once, but by the people who matter. Because authenticity isn't about becoming someone different. It's about finally allowing yourself to be who you already are. And maybe that's the magic in Elsa's story. Not creating ice, but melting fear. If today's episode got you thinking, don't forget to like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe so you don't miss future deep dives into the psychology of your favorite stories and characters. And if you're ready to go on your own self transformation journey, I have created the Grounded Mage's Hero's Journey Journal. It's designed to help you explore your own story, identify the challenges you're facing, and move through your own hero's journey with a greater awareness and intention. You will find reflection prompts, exercises, and tools that pair perfectly with episodes like this one. There's a link to a freebie preview in the description down below, and if you like what you see there, you can also purchase this journal with one of the links in the description down below. Next week, we are heading to Wakanda, where we are going to talk about T'Challa and the psychology of leadership, legacy, responsibility, and what happens when the expectations of others collide with the person you're trying to become. Trust me, it's gonna be a good one. Until next week, fellow mages, make it make magic.